this video I'm going to show you how to find buck bedding areas and how to create them. So in this spot, in this particular spot, we've got a lot of goldenrod cover, which is not great for deer, and we're going to try and put in switchgrass lines and pockets throughout here so the deer feel more comfortable and they have more places to bed. But I've seen does bed in here and bucks bed in here, and the number one thing that I look for when I'm looking for buck bedding areas especially is rubs. And we just passed up a really nice rub over here. It was actually on a thorn tree. And then we have that I looked at yesterday scouting. I found 3 other good rubs down here. So that is a clear, just because there's a rub does not mean it's a buck bedding area. But you should have rubs. If you have a good cover spot like we have here and you have rubs in them, then you can almost bet on it that it's a buck bedding area. And so we actually have, last year we had a rub right behind this camera, and this, you can't really see it, but I'll put a video up on here. And there's this canopy right here, and oh, there's a new scrape, or a new rub right here that I can see. But being said, that is a great place for a buck to bed. And so deer like bedding in canopies, not too small, not too high, especially if you're doing hinge cut bedding areas. Hinge cut buck bedding areas, I haven't personally done it because I don't have that many trees on this property, but hinge cutting is, most people do it out face high, but when you should be doing it at waist high, because bucks, especially if you have them face high, they don't want to bed underneath. They're not going to bed underneath hinge cuts. That's not what it's for. It's for making cover on the sides, just like with switchgrass. Obviously, you can't plant it up in the air, but just pretend you have switchgrass up in the air. They're not going to want to bed under the switchgrass because the wind can still get through there. They want to have it on the sides, planted up from the ground, so that way it's a windbreak and thermals for them, if that makes sense. So same idea with hinge cutting. Doing it waist high and dropping the trees where they can still eat off of them. It's still alive and producing vegetation, and it'll provide a lot of cover for them, especially in the late winter months. And so that's one way to create a buck bedding area, is hinge cutting. And it's not the best for all parcels, but it is for some. But right in here, like I said, we have a lot of goldenrod, and I want to take a lot of this goldenrod out and plant switchgrass, because goldenrod, as you can see, you can see through all of it. Switchgrass that you cannot see through. It's a lot better for thermals and keeping them a lot warmer during, especially the late season in winter. Now, our season's over, and so I've been out here scouting a lot, and actually found a small little button buck that a coyote's got too. But it was in a bedding area, and those are just really good spots to look for old deer that have died, and you can find their sheds, stuff like that. If you're going shed hunting, bedding areas are almost number one. And so this is a really cool place. And another thing about creating buck bedding areas is putting in browse. And you cannot have a bedding area if you do not have browse, because if you don't have browse in your bedding areas, then those bucks are going to leave. They feed 5 times in a 24-hour period, so they need something to eat while they're bedded. And I've said this before, not putting a food plot right next to your bedding area. That's not what you do. You need to space them out strategically and put them in the right spots that fit your deer herd and your land. But browse in here, just like blackberries. I haven't experimented with fruit trees yet, which I don't think it would hurt. But especially the number one ingredient for putting browse in buck bedding areas and bedding areas in general is red osier dogwood. And I put in a lot of dogwood over to the left side of our property. And over here to the right side, there is a natural red osier dogwood plants. So I'm going to be taking this year, getting cuttings from those plants and planting them, more of them, in my bedding areas because I don't have enough and they're not tall enough. So I'm going to be transplanting them or just making cuttings off of them. But that is really important to have food for while they're bedding. And so there's been plenty of rubs in here. I found beds in here before. I've had a doe right over here to my right be bedded down. And so you can tell when it's a buck bedding area, when it's a doe bedding area. And another thing is when you're going from when a buck is bedded, it's got to get to a food source. And so you need to be bedding over here, and then does in front. So if you have a wooded parcel, bucks in the back, does in the front, food in the front, in front of the does. Because bucks travel a lot farther, and they don't want to be stressed out by the does, and they don't want to be stressed out by the does in the food plots as well. And so this is the bucks that I've seen on camera. They will come from far away and come to a food plot or any good food source that is available. And so we're going to go to the doe bedding area here in a little bit, which is probably a couple 100 yards away, probably 400 yards away, 500 yards away. But the food plot is probably 200 yards away, and the field's probably 100 yards away. And so the way this land is set up, it's it's right surrounded around ag land, and so bucks are going to be bedding closer. Now that's not with every parcel. Most of the time they bed a lot farther away. But this is the farthest away in our property, especially, that they can get from a food source, and they can travel. And so bucks want to travel to their food sources in their staging areas. They're gonna maybe browse a little bit in their staging areas and then go to their destination food source, which is a field in this case. And so does are different. Does and bucks are basically completely different when it comes to bedding, food, anything that requires that. They're a lot different. Does will bed 20 yards from a food source. I've even spooked deer getting into a food source at 2 or 3 o'clock because they're bedded right next to the food because they don't want to travel that far. And so, no, I didn't spook any bucks, but I spooked does because they bed closer to food. And it was just like this. Like I said, the food was right here, the does were right behind it, and the bucks were right behind it. I can see that constantly. Bucks in the back, does in front of the bucks, food in front of the does. And so we're going to go over to the doe bedding, and that's where I planted the switchgrass. And another thing is, if you are wanting to create buck beds and stuff like that, you have to work on your doe bedding first before you have buck bedding. If you don't have does bedding, you don't have bucks bedding. That's how it works. And so we're going to go over to the doe bedding, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and just even an update on how the bedding area is doing. And we're going to plant browse in that too because there's no browse in there. They still bedded in there, but they're going to travel and go off your land. And so it doesn't take decades to have a nice hunting property. It takes probably, if you're planting trees, it might take a lot longer, but especially you don't have to have trees to have quality bucks and a quality deer herd. And we don't have that many trees here, and I have a good amount of bucks on my cameras. So, alright, now finally we're going to go over there and we're going to talk a little bit more about doe bedding and buck bedding. Okay, so here we are in the doe bedding area, and as you can see, the switchgrass has done really well, and it's already up to my waist, but it still has a lot more to grow, and we're going to mow this in the spring, and it'll be even better next year for the deer, and especially the does. And as you can see, over here, there is a field, and the reason why I put the doe bedding right here is because the does want to bed as close to the food source as they can. And especially when the corn's up, they're going to love this spot because they can bed right here and go eat the corn without being pressured or without predators seeing them, or hunters seeing them for that matter. And so right down in here, there's a dip right here, they're crossing through here. They can bed down here, but there's also really good bedding area down in here, and I found a couple rubs down in there too. And you might be thinking, well, if there's rubs down there, then that's a buck bedding area. No, just because it's a buck bedding area, or just because it's a doe bedding area, doesn't mean bucks won't bed in it. And just because it's a buck bedding area doesn't mean does won't bed in it. It's just that normally, and most of the time, 90% of the time, you can bet that bucks are bedding over there, and does are bedding right here because of the food. And now, bucks bed in here, or bucks are rubbing in here because during the rut, this is the best place to find does. And they're making their territory, they're marking their territory with their rubs and scrapes. I even heard a buck make a scrape over here out of the blind. So, that was really cool. And we're going to go, I can't wait to work on this more and plant Red Osier Dogwood in here and stuff, and work on it even more. So that would be really good. So I hope this helps you if you're creating buck bedding areas, and I'm going to be doing the same thing this spring as well. And I'll be making videos on that too, so that way you can see how I've been doing them, and possibly, if it fits your land right, you can use them too.